It is officially 5 o'clock in Doney Park and Timberline and Fernwood right now, so I think it is time to begin our meeting. I would like to welcome everyone to our meeting this afternoon and thank everyone for your participation in this public effort to help maintain our neighborhoods the way that we would like to see them go. A couple of quick notes here. The first one is about microphones. It's best if those of you that aren't participating immediately in that conversation keep your microphones muted. That will help the rest of us be able to hear the speakers that are actually presenting at the time. We'll try to hold questions until the end of each presentation. So if you have to, maybe jot down some notes or whatever during the presentation, and then we'll have a period of time at the end so that we're not all trying to talk over each other and that kind of a thing. The public is welcome to participate in this and join in. And I don't know that we have any, Melissa, we've been still posting this as required. Well, not legally required, I guess, but we're meeting the legal requirements. Is that correct?
Correct.
And we haven't had a lot of public participation. I think that perhaps the Zoom format might be not as friendly as something person to person and face. So hopefully that will change when we can get back to actual in-person meetings sometime here in the future. But all of you that talk with folks, if any of them are interested in either watching or participating, they're certainly welcome to. Melissa is recording this and it'll be available later on. So if there's any questions about what we did, or if for some reason you have to leave the meeting, all of it will be available on the Planning and Zoning website page that is dedicated to all the resources associated with this effort. So with that, why don't we go around the room and introduce ourselves? I can start. I'm Rob Wilson here in Timberline. I'm co-chairing with Brian, who I thought I saw Brian. Brian's not here yet.
I don't see him yet.
No, okay. With Brian, and perhaps I'm just going to go on a call on people so we make sure we make this quick and simple. So Harriet?
Okay, now.
Okay. Yes.
Just introduce yourself briefly.
Oh, okay. Harriet Young. I'm on somebody else's computer, even worse. And I live off of Girls Ranch Road at Waukee Road. So I'm at the furthest end of this entire region.
Thank you very much. John?
There we go. Unmute. John Ruggles. I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I think perhaps officially the thorn in the side of community development staff. So
Not true. Not true.
Thanks, Melissa.
Okay, let's see, moving around here, it looks like, who do we have next here? Mr. Richardson, or no, Liz, there we go, Elizabeth Richardson.
Hi, Elizabeth Richardson. I work with Coconino County. I've recently transferred to environmental health and public health, but was the zoning inspector, and I will speak about my experience in Doney Park tonight, if you all will have it.
Well, we very much appreciate you coming back for us here to
bet.
Thank you.
Ditto that.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, and Dark Skies, Mark?
Yeah, Mark Stento. I'm the outdoor lighting enforcement specialist for the city and the county.
Ooh, enforcement specialist. That sounds very impressive. Monica?
Good.
Monica?
You muted, Monica.
There we
Now
go.
it unmuted. It was being stubborn. Anyways, I'm Monica. I live on John Wayne Boulevard. I've been there for a while, and one of the places where the flooding came through pretty bad, so that's why flooding is something that I keep on my radar.
Great, thank you. Dave?
There I am. I think should be unmuted now. Dave Browning. I live in Doney Park in Pioneer Valley. I've been here since I'm retired. My wife's retired, and we've moved here in 06.
Thank you. Cameron?
Cameron Watson. I'm a land and homeowner here in Timberline. Run a couple of nonprofits and a couple businesses here.
Thank you. Jessica, the wildlife expert?
Expert. Oh boy. I guess that's me. I'm Jessica Simmons. I'm the Urban Wildlife Planner for Coconino County and Arizona Game and Fish.
Okay. Jay's iPad. We don't see your video yet. There's Jay. Oh, that's Mark, maybe. No.
Sorry, Rob.
There you go.
I have to go into my settings to get the video going, but I am here. Good evening, everybody.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Rob.
Let's see. We talked to Jessica already. We talked to Jess. Are you there?
Yes, Jess McNeely, Planning and Zoning Staff with Community Development Department.
Thank you, Jess. Carol? Carol?
Hello, I'm just here listening, just learning and observing.
Excellent. Well, welcome, and thank you very much for participating.
Thanks.
Evelyn?
Hello, it's Evelyn, Doney Park. I mean, Timberline, duh.
We're all neighbors. It's okay.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I'm glad you know where I am.
Okay. And I have what looks like a cell phone number that ends in 3053 with no name. Could you identify yourself?
Yes, this is David Wessel. I'm with Metro Plan. I'll be logging into the video Zoom meeting as it gets closer to my presentation. In the meantime, I'll be listening. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Appreciate that. I think that's everybody here that is participating at this point.
We got Bernice just came in.
Oh. There's Bernice. You want just a quick introduction?
I'm Bernice Carver. I'm on the committee, and I've been in Doney Park for over 40 years.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to reviewing our meeting minutes from the last meeting. I hope everyone that participated had a chance to take a look at those minutes and ask if anyone has any comments or thoughts about those. No comments or thoughts about the meeting minutes.
I'll just mention one thing, that there was plenty to keep my attention as I read those. So beyond that, I don't have anything to add or subtract. So I think Melissa did a very good job of summing everything up and giving us the minutes.
Just give credit to Jessica for those.
Yeah,
okay. Jessica did an exceptional job with them.
The minutes master.
Credit where credit is due then.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
All right. So we'll accept the minutes as they were presented, and we'll move on to this afternoon or evening's presentations. Fortunately, Ms. Richardson has volunteered to come back from her new position and enlighten us about code enforcement, which has been an issue that's been already talked about several times here. So we're looking forward to hearing a lot more about that, if you'd like to take the stage.
And there you go, Elizabeth.
Awesome. Okay. So Doney Park, and again, if you all have any questions, I'd be happy to answer anything, but I'll just go over a little bit of an overview of what I feel are major issues in the Doney Park area from a code compliance perspective. Probably in that area, I would get 50 to 70 calls per year. The largest and most vocal group of complainants would be about vacation rentals. And that could be for a variety of reasons. It was due to events at these vacation rentals, and which caused parking problems, fire department and police issues. Sometimes it is that people who have a primary dwelling have RVs in the front for rent, and neighborhoods and communities tend to not like that. Sometimes it was issues that were more dangerous, like buses that had fireplaces in them, or really just dwellings that weren't meant to be dwellings, that were rented out. So that was the number one thing that I got complaints about, with multiple people contacting me, sometimes 10 to 20, or large groups of people that were very upset about that. Does anybody have any comments or questions about that?
Could you back up just one step and let us know what the code compliance department has with respect to staffing and that kind of a thing? I mean, is it just one person? And
I think for the time being, it probably will be one person. Jay or Jess may be able to speak more to that.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks for doing this. And it's great to see you.
Good to see you too.
So yeah, there are only two full-time equivalent positions: a compliance manager and one code enforcement officer. But because of COVID and the negative impacts to county budget, there are quite a number of positions that were vacant that are going to be on hold for upwards of 2 years. So it'll just be the compliance manager for the foreseeable future.
Okay. And in the complaints that you've been receiving, how many of those were actually also violations of law versus issues that were actually like code violations that law enforcement wouldn't be expected to address?
I think that there is some intersection between code enforcement and law enforcement, but primarily the things that I go out are strictly code enforcement, and I try and keep them very separate. Very little law enforcement be involved here, perhaps with an event where there were parking or there was a noise violation. The sheriff's department might be called on something like that, but not much in the Doney Park area crosses over into law enforcement.
Okay.
Okay, so that would be the largest issue. And then after that, things like commercial use in a residential area is something that also bothered a lot of residents there. And that could be anything from animal shelters in homes to had someone call me about garbage business that was being run out of a home. A lot of businesses in that area. And I think that one of the things that I wanted to mention and that I've got down at the bottom of the slide is that there seems like there's a kind of a collision of cultures in there right now. Very new people are coming in and buying homes that are extremely expensive, $400,000 and $1,000 and up. And then there are people who have lived there for 40 years and more who bought their property a long time ago and bought property when there was a very different culture in Doney Park. And there's kind of this collision happening right now between these two groups. And the expectation is for the people who have bought the new and very expensive homes that everything's going to be really well kept up and very tidy. And sometimes the people who have lived there for a very long time that come from more of an agricultural background don't have a problem so much with things that have been stored there or things being just more relaxed as far as the code. So I'm not sure how you all have felt about that or if you've seen that. Have you had experiences with that?
We haven't received a lot of public comment on that specifically.
Okay.
Some of the things that have come up are things about noise complaints, dust complaints, motocross tracks on your neighbor's yard. Those types of things have been mentioned in the past. But I think you really that's a great the collision of the cultures, I think, is one that we really need to capture here tonight, because I think that is an important issue, a big picture here with our community.
I'd like to make one little bit of a comment on that this is something that, say at the at staff level and also Planning and Zoning Commission level, that we are constantly paying attention to, because all of us are very aware of this. And that is something that has a tendency to dictate some of the compromises that are necessary when it comes to things like use permits and performance with relation to neighborhood businesses like cottage industries and that sort of thing. So it's something that at that level, and as it goes up to the Board of Supervisors, I think that everyone there is very well aware that this is going on. I know I am constantly.
Right. Okay, good. So some of the other strong issues there, one of the pictures that I've got there is an old electric box that someone had kind of hot wired up and doing things without a permit. And the really important, it is so important to get those permits for several reasons. One is to prevent fire, certainly the safety of the community. Also, when it comes time to sell a home, it's just easier if all the permits are in place, and it's just a better and safer way for everybody to do things. Got a lot of calls from neighbors who saw things that they felt were not permitted, and I would come out and check that out, and not a big deal. Everybody complies and gets the permits, and they understand why it's necessary. Many people don't understand, or they're not sure when a permit is needed. So a lot of education has been helpful. And then other than that, I would say just junk, just storage, lots of storage. The bottom picture there shows somebody out there with a lot of storage that did not have a septic system even, and had a porta-john out there. So those kind of issues come up as well sometimes in Doney Park. Horses, excess horses sometimes are an issue, manure, things of that nature. But those are the main kind of things that I got in Doney Park. It wasn't, people were polite, people are kind. Those are just the common things that come up in Doney Park. Any other questions or anything else that I can help with this evening?
Elizabeth, sorry, just wanted to ask you to mention that for code compliance, you actually cover all of community development departments, not just planning and zoning.
That is true. Whoever is the compliance manager generally does planning and zoning. They do complaints for the building division. They do complaints for the engineering division and environmental quality.
That's a heck of a job that you have there. It sounds like you were pretty successful out here in the Doney Park area, and that there weren't major issues that you were unable to get resolved relatively easily. Is that fair?
I think that's fair to say. I think that people in that area are just great citizens, and just very little education was needed, and people did what needed to be done. And I really appreciate that community for that.
I'm Bernice. I was just wondering, when people make a complaint in Coconino County, are they allowed to make an anonymous complaint if they have fear of retribution from their neighbors?
Let me talk just a minute about that. Generally, we do not take anonymous complaints, and there's a lot of reasons for that. That is stated on the code enforcement request. There's a Arizona law that states that we may not take anonymous requests. People have the right to confront their accuser, is one reason that we don't take anonymous requests. Another reason is that everything that comes into the county is public information. In addition to that, sometimes in the past, when there have been anonymous requests, the amount of requests that comes in is huge. If people feel like they're fully anonymous, then they will submit things that maybe are smaller in nature, or things that are in retribution for a slight that they feel that their neighbor, some kind of painful event that has happened in between neighbors. So this just helps to limit it. So again, I think that there are those three reasons, four maybe. One, we have the right to confront our accuser. We're a public agency and documents are public, and that also keeping it in this way keeps people from doing things that are just in retribution.
I'd like to Oh. Go ahead.
Occasionally, if there is documented proof of abuse over time, some can be anonymous, but we would really need something, some kind of proof or evidence like police reports or things of that nature.
Okay. I had called the city of Flagstaff, and they do allow anonymous complaints for the city of Flagstaff. And I got curious. I called the city of Phoenix. I called Maricopa County. We are the only county in Arizona that does not allow anonymous complaints. Some of them allow anonymous complaints online. And if somebody really wanted to find out who did the complaint, they could go through the Attorney General's office and they could subpoena the information. Most of the cities that I talked to and the counties, actually the other 14 counties, all allow anonymous complaints. And I live out here where this bus is, and there's a lot of places, well, it's not just out here, but there are people renting garages, there are people renting barns, there's people renting RVs on their lots, multiple RVs, there's people with businesses that have the multiple RVs. And there are people that have complained in the past and have felt intimidated by the people who are breaking the law. And I think that, you know, having the anonymous part protects the person that is not in violation. And it makes the people, I mean, it's getting worse and worse out here. And I'm curious, what happened with the bus?
The bus with the fireplace right there?
Yes.
So the fact of that bus is that it is a licensed and registered vehicle. And it was licensed and registered as a recreational with that fireplace in it, and I found that just amazing. They showed me the documentation on that, and the vehicle was legally parked. One of the things that we discussed is that if they were renting that space, that wouldn't be appropriate for the long term, and they have an exit plan. They won't be staying there much longer.
Okay. I still feel strongly that it would really help clean up some of these areas of the county if we could have some sort of anonymous complaint, like an online system like many of the other counties do that have less resources than we do. And with the county last year making it feasible for people to add other residences on their lots, we're getting way more dust out here. People are not just adding one residence to their lot, they're adding multiple in some cases. And it's really increased the traffic. I don't see a lot of people that have the multiple residents on their lots coming out to help with the road maintenance. And just the traffic and the noise in general. I think that we shouldn't be the only county in Arizona that has the inability to protect ourselves. If we have somebody, that's causing problems in our neighborhood, it just seems like there ought to be some other way to have somebody come check on them and make sure they're in compliance.
Hey, Bernice, if I could make a recommendation, I think that you bring up some really good points. Unfortunately, I think they're outside the scope of our area plan document. And I think both Jay and Jess might be people that you could talk to in detail about that, because they may have the ability to make some changes with respect to that.
Yeah. I'd like to give you a little really quick background on that. Until our current county attorney came into office, that was not a requirement. I know Bill Ring, and I know the rationale behind his opinion that the complaints could not be anonymous. And for Bill, it is a constitutional issue, as we have already heard. And that's the reason why we are doing this. I remember when that occurred, and we were informed of that by staff at the Planning and Zoning Commission as one of the updates that we get every meeting. So that, in a nutshell, is why we're where we are.
And in an effort to try to stay on schedule, since this is outside the scope of what our area plan can do, as I mentioned, I think all of this is great discussions to have with Jay and Jess at another time.
I just wanted to interject. We could write up memos that we could give out to people and say these following things, and it would be like an educational document.
And I think we've got some brochures that we can, Elizabeth, is that right? I think that there is possibly a brochure that talks about compliance.
No, you could deliver a brochure to somebody and just say this has been a problem for us, and it's non-confrontational. I'm off.
So that could be something too. But I agree with Rob that this is a good topic of discussion. It does reach much broader than what the area plan can address. And I know, we can certainly, Bernice, further the conversation, outside of the scope here. But yeah, it's important to know about.
Because and we need to include it in our survey. The last area plan did include it in their survey, and they made a lot of comments about it.
Specifically what, Bernice? The ability to make an anonymous complaint?
Not an anonymous complaint, but there needs to be more code compliance. And there's a lot of places that even when they did the other area plan that were out of compliance, and they needed to bring them up to compliance, and this is a way to do it. And if all the other counties are out of compliance with the state law, I don't see how they're getting away with that.
Okay. Elizabeth, one last question, I guess, for you would be, is there anything that you think would be important to include in an updated area plan based on your experiences out here in Doney and Timberline, Fernwood?
I think that one of a big issue there is that with housing being really expensive, is that people are really working desperately to try and find either ways to supplement that housing bill, and oftentimes that's going to be in bringing other people in on their property, or having a business out of their home. And I think that that's going to be an important issue for you all to wrestle with. I have empathy for people who are just trying to have a small place to live here. It's a beautiful place to live. It's also very expensive. And, what are we going to do about that? How can we welcome people to Flagstaff and let them have a place to live and have some kind of dignity? I don't know what the answers are to that. So I think that is something that you all have the power to deal with this. And I really encourage you to do that. I think that that's going to be a huge issue for the Doney Park area.
Certainly in the visioning documents where we describe what it is Doney is about. That's something we want to make sure to address. And Melissa, I'm sure you caught that?
Yes, Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions for Elizabeth before we let her continue on and thank her for her participation?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. We really appreciate your taking the time this evening to come back into compliance, even though it's only been a few weeks.
You bet. It's my pleasure. It is my pleasure. Thank you for asking me. And I am going to stand by for a little bit and watch Mark and see if he's got anything.
Yeah, there may be some overlap there. So
any way that I can support or anything I might learn. Thank you very much.
All right, with that excellent segue there, Mark, I don't know how you could not step up to the podium and share some information with us.
Couldn't ask for better. Thank you, Elizabeth. So real quick background on me. I came into city code compliance 2 years ago and was given jurisdiction in the county to at least enforce outdoor lighting standards through an intergovernmental agreement in February of this year. So my efforts within the county are relatively new. We're still trying to get that program off the ground. I've been under Elizabeth since I've been over in the county. She's going to be very, very much missed. And she's been extremely helpful. So I have dealt with some stuff in the Doney area in the last couple months, specifically some residential complaints and some ongoing commercial issues. More on that later. I want to keep this relevant to the content you guys are looking for. I am going to go over a little bit of background and relevance here. It's always kind of hard doing these things because some of you probably know all about this. Some probably are relatively new to it. So I'm going to try and kind of breeze through it. I'm going to include some references in the end. So if you want to educate yourself more on outdoor lighting standards, either within the city or the county, you'll have some tools available to do that. And if you have any questions, you want to interject anything, feel free to shout anything out. It doesn't bother me at all. The city and the county have similar outdoor lighting standards, although the city is moving forward a little more rapidly with advancing theirs because of the density. However, I'm going to refer to the city and the county kind of interchangeably because I serve both areas and because we are dealing with similar situations with similar versions of code. So I'm going to share my screen and go over a quick presentation here. And like I said, just kind of bear with me through some of it and I'll kind of bring in the relevance to Doney and the surrounding areas here toward the end. Let me see if I can share my screen and not screw this up. All right. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. So let me go ahead and start this up. Okay, so again, stuff you may be familiar with. Flagstaff and county have a astronomical history going back to the turn of the 20th century. The city of Flagstaff was the first international dark sky place with the IDA in 2001. And the city has had increasingly restrictive lighting standards as density has increased for the last 40 plus years, starting in the 50s with specific ordinance that addressed searchlights. And major revisions have occurred within the last 20. We're working with the county to try and get some of those passed on. The county is essentially working with a slightly older version of our code. More importantly, and what to take from this, both the city and the county have lumens per square acre limits. That applies to commercial primarily, and single family residential properties have max lumens per parcel. We have 4 observatories in the area now. Those areas have increasingly restrictive lighting zones around them. Both the city and the county are broken up into 3 lighting zones, 1 being the most restrictive, 3 being the least restrictive. All of those have lumens per square acre limits. All of Doney is and the surrounding areas are in lighting zone 3. Now I've seen reference to this in the plan when I was reviewing that documentation before putting this presentation together, and we can chat a little bit more about that later. The joint land use study in 2015 identified essentially a 10% margin where we will reach critical threat levels in terms of sky glow. Since then, considerable developments occurred. We've seen additional residential development, both in the county and the city. And while we haven't been able to objectively measure those sky glow increases, we are nearing that critical threat level. LED development is going at a staggering pace, and that's certainly not helping things. We also know there are significant human and animal health effects with continued exposure to blue light from LEDs at night. That's all very early research at this point, but it has a pretty big impact. So jumping into current code as applicable to the areas we're discussing tonight, as noted, Doney Park resides entirely in lighting zone 3. Pursuant to county code, there are some lumen limits for single family residential. It's not based on acreage. It's based on a residence, a parcel. So total shielded and unshielded light allowed is 30,000 lumens. Total unshielded light allowed, and I'll get into those definitions here in a minute, is 2,000 lumens. Unshielded light is anything that goes off into the atmosphere and not essentially straight down, give or take. And any fixtures above 1,000 lumens must be fully shielded. Now, we see a lot of issues out in Doney, and I'm going to get into these in the surrounding areas, and I'm going to get more into the shielding component later. But what happens essentially is what I've seen out there, we have legacy type fixtures, carriage style fixtures in front of garages, lantern style fixtures, some unique stuff that may have been put in place 20, 30 years ago that's been retrofitted with LEDs. And that's an issue in the area. It's causing substantial impact. And I'm moving pretty quickly here. Is everyone following along? Am I losing anyone? Any questions so far? Are we 100%?
LEDs and compact fluorescents.
CFLs are kind of on their way out. But LED technology is moving pretty rapidly. I mean, we're seeing medium base, screw-in bulbs that you can stick in your lantern or your carriage style lanterns in front of your garage that have 1,200 to 2,000 lumens, which, it would be unshielded pursuant to code and a code violation. Anyway, there are lumens per square acre limits on commercial and industrial parcels. Again, that's based on acreage. A small amount of unshielded light is allowed. You can see it's 3%, not very much. The majority of light, which is class 2 light and luminaires above 2,500 lumens, must be narrow spectrum amber. Narrow spectrum amber, you're going to hear me refer to later. It is essentially the LED equivalent of the low pressure sodium standard from the last 40 years. I won't go too far into that. Any questions on code as applied to Doney? Nope. Okay.
Mark, yes.
Yes, sir.
Would you go back just a minute? You were saying that Doney Park was class 2. If you went through the zoning, I'm sorry, they're lighting zone 3. Mm-hmm. What's lighting zone 3 parameters?
They're right here up on my screen. So lighting zone 3, 30,000 lumens per residence, shielded, unshielded, et cetera.
Just real quick.
And is that per building? I thought you said per resident, so that would be
per parcel.
Per parcel, that was it.
So
per parcel.
Yeah.
So if we decrease the amount of space per parcel, if we go to like 1.5 acres in some zoning, that would mean that they could then legally increase the amount of light that's being emitted.
There is an increase in allowable light for a corresponding increase in acreage for commercial and industrial properties, not for residential. Is that what you're referring to?
If you did a split of a residential lot right now, would they be 2 parcels and therefore have twice that allowable lighting?
Yes.
That's a planning and zoning question.
Yes, that is the case.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
thank you.
The city's the same way.
I have one thing. You said you were going to talk about the Doney Park area plan requirement. What's in the area plan about lighting zone 2 versus the actual code requirements, which puts us in 3.
Right.
Am I correct?
Yeah, that's what I saw. I did see numerous references to lighting zone 2. I'm new to the plan in these conversations, so feel free to educate me on why that's the case.
Yeah, I can jump in on that too. Or go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was going to say, first thing, I guess I should let Mark know, I'm probably the biggest proponent of the lighting code update that is eventually going to come about for the county on the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm kind of the go-to guy on the commission when these questions come up because of my engineering background. But anyway, one thing that I would like to mention, and this is something that Rob Wilson has been through relative to class 2 lighting. He had to jump through some hoops with his parking area because of the problem with availability at the time of narrow spectrum amber lighting. That's changed quite a bit. It's improved dramatically because there are a number of manufacturers that make it available, especially for area lighting like that. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that and then let you go ahead. So thank you.
Oh, yeah, no, good.
And if I could just jump in and fill in some more information about, so Doney Park in the area plan policies, and I believe it's in the DRO, the Design Review Overlay section. The previous area plan adopted Class 2 lighting standards for the area plan. Belmont just did the same thing. So even though it falls within Zone 3, the area plan elected to adopt the Zone 2, which is more restrictive. So just keep that in mind, and we'll talk about that later, but just so you know that it is actually Zone 2 that applies to Doney Park.
We should talk about the enforceability of that too, because I am knocking on doors out there as complaints come in.
Okay, well, we can talk later about that, yeah.
That sounds good.
I have a couple of comments here. When we moved here, we're a homeowners association, and having been, somewhat knowledgeable about dark skies problem, as I pointed out to them that almost none of the houses, except the one that we have that I replaced the outdoor lights, meet the compliance. And they said, well, it's not our problem. And so I think that one of the things that you might consider is if there's a homeowners association is getting them educated. The other thing is that I have noticed that Homer School lighting, I'm not an expert on this, but it doesn't appear that it is the appropriate lighting that is required.
So if I can touch on those 2 points, you're right about HOAs. While I certainly spend quite a bit of time on county cases, I spend quite a bit on city cases as well. We deal with a lot of those situations. You're absolutely right. As available, we do reach out to HOAs. It's a great way to get voluntary compliance as well. In regard to Cromer, when we found out they were planning on replacing the exterior lighting on all FUSD schools, I reached out to Bob Coons, and we started a discussion with FUSD, and they're going through the permitting process with the city, and they will be submitting a permit to the county, which I will be reviewing for Cromer as well, to bring all your FUSD schools into compliance with outdoor lighting standards.
Terrific.
Should see a change in Cromer. I don't know what their install timeline is. I don't think they've submitted a permit yet, but I've reviewed almost a dozen permits for schools within city limits. So there will be movement on it.
I'm sorry.
Go, please go.
One question for you. Have you done a spectral analysis of the lighting at Cromer? Because the eyeball test says it's probably around 4,000, somewhere between 4,000, 5,000 K LED.
I haven't, but it should all be being replaced.
Great, and I'm sure you're going to hold their feet to the fire on this. I know Bob Short has spoken rather well of you in regards to.
Oh, thank you. Well, and FUSDs, I can't give them enough credit. They've been outstanding about this. They haven't required a ton of pushing on it. They've been great about working with us. So we're going to see millions of lumens reduced across FUSD schools in the city, and obviously Cromer will contribute to that too. The reductions are substantial.
That's very fantastic. Good news. Thank you.
Yeah, it was all them. I just kind of shook my finger at them. Moving on real quick. So let me see if I can move my little video screen there. So again, many folks already know this. I apologize for the redundancy if you do. Just kind of, glancing at it real quickly. County code is at this moment a little less restrictive than city code in terms of outdoor lighting standards. Right now, outdoor floodlight projections above the horizontal plane are prohibited. However, some unshielded light is allowed. I assume that will be addressed in the future. An interesting component of county lighting that definitely affects the area in discussion here is motion sensors. Now, I've dealt with some of these while I've been out there on a couple of complaints. Now, motion sensitive lights that are only on for a short period of time and are limited to 2,000 lumens per fixture can go up to 8,000 lumens of unshielded light. The city is the opposite. We are more restrictive on motion sensitive light. But something to be aware of when you're factoring in application of lighting code to the Doney area. As it stands right now, regardless of lighting zone, there is a slight allowance for more unshielded lumens for motion sensitive fixtures. And as we all know, motion sensitive fixtures can run the gamut in terms of how invasive or how much they contribute to sky glow. There is a light trespass component to county code, again, applicable to Doney, more so to the city, because a lot of the parcels are spaced further apart out in Doney, but it still is an issue. It's a little less direct in county code as it stands right now. There's also a trespass component for public and private roads. So moving past that and to where I'm at here. So right now in the county, and this applies to the city too, proactive enforcement of commercial lighting violations is occurring in the area. I'm actively looking for commercial violations and putting documentation together on those violations as I go. The reason for that is because the impact of commercial violations is obviously substantially greater, at least the majority of the time. The residential component is more hearts and minds, and we can talk more about that later. But because you can buy unshielded fixtures and a 2,000 lumen drop-in LED at Home Depot, and they won't tell you that it's illegal, it makes the stick a harder approach for residential. And it's, at least in the city and to an extent the county too, I like to say it's a hearts and minds thing. So we're working on that. This is a component of that outreach, chatting with you folks and getting feedback. It's a big part because the feedback I get isn't implemented in my enforcement priorities. But it is primarily reactive when it comes to residential. And I do take reports through the county, through the city, or directly to my email and cell phone, which I'll give you later. So the city and the county are working together to revise outdoor lighting standards. The city's outdoor lighting standards are in revision based on the practicality of enforcement. We've been working, my department's been working with the zoning code manager to adapt our code to our enforcement priorities and techniques. And we intend to work with the county to filter those changes down to them, perhaps not down to them, as soon as they're available. Right now, we're chatting with some folks from the coalition and the community about those proposed revisions. And that's primarily through the zoning code manager. And as I noted, my position was implemented specifically as a part of a recommendation from the joint land use study to enforce. Are we doing okay so far? Am I losing anyone? 100%?
Doing great.
Great. So these are the challenges we're facing right now. Right now, communicating best practices is critical, especially to residential. Best practices entail full shielding and preferred spectrum lumen sources. For residential, it's great if you know someone's willing to install narrow spectrum amber, but there are alternatives like phosphor converted amber that are close or simply lower output with full shielding, using only the light you need, et cetera. Communicating that is a challenge right now. How do we disseminate that information? And how do we win hearts and minds in the process? It's a difficult thing, especially when there's an association of extra bright white light with security, as I'm sure many of you are aware. Ensuring shielding requirements is extremely difficult because we have all these legacy fixtures in place at these properties. I'm trying to document that as much as I can, but it's impractical in single family residential for the most part. And a lot of those fixtures may be non-conforming. They may predate in some situations, current iterations of the lighting code that may restrict them. That said, you know, if they've installed a white LED, you know, things get a little more complicated, but it certainly enhances the impact of that LED. And how do we measure lumen requirements? I have technology to measure spectra. So I can tell what light's been installed or what kind of light it is. I can measure light trespass. I can't really measure lumens. So that's a very difficult thing. Installation of new commercial lighting without a permit. That's something I can catch proactively and I'm working on. The nice thing about LEDs is I know, generally speaking, when a given fixture or luminaire was produced, LEDs haven't been around that long. So if I have a really old property with a really new light, now chances are they updated it. If they don't have a permit, there's a violation. That's how I catch a lot of stuff within the city. That's something I'm looking at in the county as well. And proliferation of white light and high lumen count luminaires, as we talked about, it's pretty substantial. So moving on real quick, I'm not going to get too much into the technical details of visible light, but I do want everyone to take a look real quick if you're unfamiliar with the technical components of this stuff. The low pressure sodium lights that are no longer really being made have produced a very narrow spectrum of light with poor color rendition, but usable light for a lot of class 2 applications, general lighting, security lighting, etc. I happen to really like the color. It produces a very narrow spectrum of light, as you can see here. Now, modern narrow spectrum amber that we refer to produces a slightly wider spectrum of light. However, you know, since LPS is no longer being made, you know, we take what we can get. Now that more manufacturers are producing this kind of luminaire, we're having a much easier time with it. More on that later. Moving on real quick, if we compare this spectra, and this is narrow spectrum amber spectra, this is a slightly lower impact phosphor converted. But when we look, this is a 4000K LED. Now notice the blue spike here and all the green. The blue spike, without getting, again, too far into the technical side of photometrics, the blue emissions from simply a 4000K LED are substantial. And if you could see my data on the side, the sky glow created relative to low pressure sodium, 6.4 times. Relative to high pressure sodium, 2.7 times. And this is from an off the shelf, this image was taken from an off the shelf 4000K white LED bulb. We see these installed all over town in single family residential. And these things are the bane of my existence now, because you can get them anywhere, dirt cheap, and install them, and they cause all sorts of glare issues, sky glow problems, etc. So I included that spectra just so everyone could get an idea of what we can see. Now, interestingly, real quick before I move on, this is, I believe, that was a 2700K. And what I do want everyone to take away from this, who may not be experienced or have some interest in outdoor lighting standards, is that you see a lot of conversation centered around color temperature and the effect of color temperature on sky glow. Well, color temperature is subjective to the human eye. It's not necessarily indicative of impact, environmental impact. So if we look at a 2700K, we still see relatively substantial blue emissions compared to a phosphor converted amber, a lot compared to the narrow spectrum amber. So again, if you take anything away from the technical component of this before I move on, color is not indicative of impact. A warm light is not necessarily a dark sky friendly light. And I see this again and again and again. 2700K is not a substitute for LPS. 2200K is not a substitute for LPS or narrow spectrum amber, not by any stretch of the imagination. Spectra is what's critical. This is a brief summary, so we can kind of hone in on a couple of the points I was talking about. Just essentially reiterates what I was saying. LEDs aren't bad. It may seem like it when I talk about this a lot, and I hate to give that impression. They're not. They're fantastic, but they're so efficient and they're so prolific. Prudence is needed in their implementation. Lighting design becomes much more important. These are examples of shielding. These are taken from city code. These same examples will apply to shielding standards for the county. So you can get an idea of what may be an unshielded light versus a full shield and a partial shield. Now, some of these images can always be a little difficult because you can't see where the luminaire is within. We do consider frosted glass where you can't see the bulb or the luminaire itself from the side of the fixture to be partially shielded. There are limits on partial shielding light both in the city and in the county. As a general rule, unshielded light is light that goes off into the horizon or above. Again, we adjudicate on a case-by-case basis, at least insofar as permitting and violations are concerned. If you want more information from this, I'll have links coming up here soon. I'm an expert at stealing images from the web and showing them to other people. This is a good one that I found. You can kind of get an idea of what full shielding looks like and why it's important. In this particular case, shielding can still exist in this image, cause light trespass, and cause glare issues too. It depends heavily on the luminaire. Ideally, we want light going straight down. Glare is a huge issue, and it actually decreases safety. This is one of my favorite images I found from the IDA. I always get the argument in my enforcement work about light and safety. Somehow there's a correlation between excess white light, particularly on shielded light, and lack of safety. And I see this again and again and again as a component of lighting design. Good lighting design can use shielded fixtures and preferred spectrum sources like narrow spectrum amber and still provide more than adequate security. Like I said, I prefer it. But you can see where excess glare caused by bright light can actually decrease security. This is a constant talking point for me. And I love this image for exactly that reason. So thanks to the IDA for that. I'm assuming it was the IDA. Lighting design, as I noted in the slide, is more important than lumens or color. So this is my contact information here, if anyone's interested. I have taken a lot, I've taken a lot from the Dark Sky Coalition. Those folks have helped me out a lot. So while the city nor the county, well, neither the city or the county is associated with the coalition in any way, they do have an amazing amount of resources available, and they're absolutely fantastic at providing that data to the public. So if you are remotely interested and you haven't been there, I recommend visiting flagstaffdarkskies.org and engaging with those folks. My mobile is right here. My city email, if there are any questions or concerns moving forward about code as applied to Doney or lighting code as applied to Doney and the surrounding areas, please reach out. I'm a little longer than I meant to be, so thanks for bearing with me. Can I answer any questions or focus in on any particular points?
Yes.
Again, I'd love to have a handout to give to neighbors because we do neighborhood meetings. I'd love to have something that I could just show them black and white what the regulations are and how they can improve things. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We have materials. I've developed materials that can meet that application. So if we can coordinate, I would love to get you stuff.
We can help distribute that, Mark. I'll get that from you.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
I'd like to add one thing to that. At our neighborhood watch meetings, I've actually given quite a number of people just a copy of section 4.3 of the county code, which deals with lighting. And the other thing, a couple of things here. I'd like to compliment you on your technical ability. Your presentation is very good. It gets it across.
Thank you.
I've been looking at quite a bit. The other question I had, have you discussed some of the updates in the code with Chris Luganbuhl?
Chris is currently reviewing some of our proposed updates. Those proposed updates are a combination of my feedback, planning and development's feedback within the city, and our zoning code manager's feedback based on his prior experiences in other municipalities. We're attempting to, and I won't go too far into this, but we're attempting to address some of the shortcomings of the current code within the city. And we're attempting to enhance our enforcement capabilities and simplify and streamline the process. So if I'm not there, someone else isn't there, someone else could easily jump into it. So we have some continuity to this effort thus far.
At the county level, I know, as I said, I'm probably the biggest proponent of making the changes that you, Chris, the Dark Sky Association would like to see, especially based on the results of the JLIS study. So Chris did a proposed rewrite of the ordinance, and when I talked with him about that here a while back, of course, would be the update that I would be 100% behind when it comes to the Planning and Zoning Commission at the county level. Along with the feedback that you're able to give him, I think it'll really go forward for a good ordinance. The other thing...
we need to stay focused on the areas that we have cognizance over here.
Well, that's where I'm going here with
okay, good.
As far as the Doney Park area goes, one of the things that we will probably have in the updated codes is that there will be no more lighting zone 3. It will go to lighting zone 2 for the entire rest of the county. Other than that, lighting zone 1 that the city and the county has right now.
The city too. We've been discussing that. I don't believe we're proposing that in this current iteration. I'll move on real quick right now because of non-conforming database issues, at least within the city. We'll see how that goes, but it's on our radar too, very much so.
Hey, Mark,
yes, sir.
Could you quickly share with us, if you know, about the economic value of having dark skies in terms of the capacity to have more visitors and increase potential economic benefits from dark skies?
So I wholeheartedly would believe what a lot of other folks do within the dark sky community, and that dark sky tourism or astrotourism is very much a thing, not just now, but of the future potentially as well. What we're going to see in the writings on the wall with this, with the development and proliferation, of LEDs, we're going to see, I think, the county and the city and other international dark sky places developing as essentially dark sky islands in a sea of light pollution. The ability to see the night sky is going to go away in a lot of places, and it already has in many others, as many of you are already aware. The trick is capitalizing on that and getting people out here to see the stars, because you can't convey that through an image, like I have on my desktop right now necessarily. Are you guys still looking at my screen? Have I turned off my?
No, we see your, it's just, you're not in presenter view, but we still see your slide.
Oh, okay. I'm going to take that off soon. So, let's see. Let me stop sharing there, because that's not really necessary anymore. Hi.
Just as a comment, I grew up in remote Montana. I know about the sky.
Well, and few people do. So there's going to be a huge opportunity to capitalize on that too. And it's going to be up to all of us to decide how we're going to do that, because none of this has been done before. This is a problem no one's faced before. And again, seeing what I see in terms of technology development and how things are moving, because, you can find the same model of flashlight that you could get before that had 450 lumens for the same price now, 30 or 40 bucks, that has 1,200, 1,500 lumens. Now that's in a battery powered flashlight. What about when we're talking about something with an AC source? It's tremendous, and that's technology development in a couple of years. So to kind of wrap that in, I think there's a huge potential for astrotourism, but I think we're going to have to come up with a way to capitalize on that. And to do that, we're going to have to make our communities truly dark sky friendly. We're getting there. There's still a lot of unshielded light, and a lot of folks who don't even know we have an ordinance in the city and the area we're talking about, in the Doney and the surrounding areas, and in the county at large. And I'm one guy, so I need help from the community.
Hey, Mark, on that question, on that point, I did have a question from a committee member who couldn't join us tonight, and that was in regard to any kind of volunteer opportunities for the community, and if you've got any capacity, either that or even, for Elizabeth, I don't know that there's any sort of volunteer opportunity for people to help with compliance.
Can he deputize someone to be a compliance officer?
I'm non-commissioned. So no deputizing necessary, but
sure, Elizabeth would have appreciated that.
But I'm sure there are. We've looked at some volunteer opportunities now. Now we're in an enforcement and data collection phase, right? And we're identifying the problem at hand too. Honestly, the most help I can get is when I get complaints and people talk to their neighbors. Those are the most helpful things. Making your own property dark sky friendly and explaining to your neighbors and other folks in the community why and how you did it is massive. Right now, I'm going out to any venue I can and reaching out. If other people have other venues they can get me into, or they can get in as a representative, a volunteer representative for either the city or the county, fantastic. But I've got the time and the availability to do that on my own. So right now, I need stuff thrown at me. I need complaints. I need questions. I need people asking how they can make their properties dark sky friendly. I've even been giving out bulbs before my budget crashed. City, we were purchasing in bulk both narrow spectrum amber and phosphor converted amber medium base bulbs, and as part of our enforcement action for residential, we were offering a couple of bulbs to grease the wheels of justice, so to speak, and get people to see if they could comply, and it was working out really, really well.
Mark, have you ever considered going to the schools, just because hopefully our next generation would learn something about living here, and then that way they could, like some people say, a lot of people don't even know that dark skies exist here, and if they were to go to the schools and educate the next generation, then perhaps they'd get inspired by it.
No, I hadn't. I hadn't considered that audience. I will mull that over and take a look at that. I appreciate that.
Mark,
Bernice has one.
this is Bernice. I have a question. Is lighting the only thing that Dark Skies looks at, or do they look at dust pollution and smoke pollution as something that could block the view of the sky?
We just deal with lighting. Lighting is a component of city and county zoning code. Those other things may be something that is overseen by ADEQ, Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. I don't know that I'd have any enforcement authority in either case. That's more of an environmental issue, although you can make an argument lighting is too, but it's outside the scope of my authority, unfortunately.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mark before we thank him for his participation? Great job there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
My pleasure. Thanks to everyone for your attention.
All right. Hopefully we still have David online here someplace. Yeah, there's David's phone number. You going to join us with video, David? Hello, David.
Dave, are you there? Dave Wessel?
Yes, I'm there.
Hi.
Excellent.
I'm gonna just stay on the phone and talk to you that way. I'm not as good looking as Mark, so I'll just spare you all the imagery. So Melissa's got my presentation. She'll bring it up.
Let me get that.
Get through it. While she's bringing that up, want to commend Mark on his presentation. I work for Metro Plan, and we are also known as the Flagstaff Metropolitan Planning Organization, and actually kind of kicked this thing off a little bit in terms of the dark sky, this transition in dark sky lighting to the LED era. There was a Dark Skies conference that we helped fund along with Lowell Observatory, and then we put $100,000 into federal money into this lighting issue and really researching the LED technology that was out there. That's been several years in the making. Was happy to kick that off and also happy to step out of it because it quickly got very technical and very time consuming. So I want to commend everybody who's been part of that conversation, including Mark.
And I am,
You want me to, if I need to, I can open up my presentation here and share screen.
Yeah, I'm having some issues here. So, oh, I think that's it. Nope.
Nope. Let me know.
Yeah, if you don't mind, if for some reason I am not able to get to your presentation. Oh, I know why. Are you still sharing screen, Mark? Are you done with it?
I stopped sharing. I should be good.
Okay, it's me. Hang on a second. It's my own presentation.
Oh,
hold on.
There we go.
Yeah, let me do this. Okay. I will enlarge this. Can we see it?
Yes.
There we go. Okay. So, good evening, everybody. If everybody can see the presentation, we'll get started. Thank you for having me. Go ahead and do the next slide. Tonight's presentation is all about me. I'm the planning manager for Metro Plan. As I mentioned, we're now doing business as Metro Plan. We've rebranded. We've been the Flagstaff Metropolitan Planning Organization for the past 23 years, and I've been hosted by the city. And starting July 1, we will be an independent nonprofit located in the Hopi Building on Heritage Square. I've got a background in transportation, land use, and community planning, park planning. I've been with the MPO almost since its beginnings in 1996. I came on board in 1997. We do regional transportation planning, including an improvement program, which is working with the city, county, and state to program projects. We do a series of studies on corridors, areas, projects, and we collect data. And I have also been resident of Doney Park out here on Pioneer Valley Road, just north of Cromer School for 23 years. Next slide, please.
It's loading, it looks like.
Okay. So the organization I work for is a federally mandated organization, and the purpose of a Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, is to work on collaboration for transportation in a region. You can imagine an area like Phoenix, and they've had several issues like this where I think it was the Loop 101 going through Tempe was planned for 6 lanes at the time, and Tempe said, we're not going to go more than 4. And the MPO receives considerable federal money down there and said, okay, well, you can do that, but we just won't send you any more federal money. And Tempe changed their tune. It's a little bit different here in Flagstaff. We really just have the city and the county to coordinate between. Although we do work very closely with our other member organizations, which include. Melissa, do I need to bring?
Yeah,
up my
I think you need
presentation?
to. I'm not. For some reason, it's not loading. I apologize.
Okay, let me grab mine. Okay, you gotta stop sharing.
I will do that.
I think it's because you have too many icons on your screen, Melissa.
It could be.
Okay, so let me see what I can do here. I think that's it. And share, and can everybody?
Now we see the rest of it, yep.
Go to present.
Yeah, I had,
Okay.
Perfect.
Great, so. Great, I can carry on then. So we're responsible for a 525 square mile area surrounding Flagstaff. That includes Doney Park and other county communities. We have an executive board made up of elected officials, 3 from the city, 2 from the county, 1 from ADOT, and 1 from NAPTA, the last 2 being appointed officials. And then we have an 8-member technical advisory committee with 2 from each of those agencies, 1 from NAU and 1 from NAPTA, the transit provider. Our staff is small, 3 of us, a business manager, an executive director, and myself. I'm the planning manager. And I was about to say next slide, but I'm in control now. Here's a shout out to our members, and here's the area that we're responsible for. You can see Doney Park up there in the upper right quadrant. We go to north of the peaks, just south of Kachina Village. We include Belmont, and we include Winona. We work with a lot of policy documents. NAPTA's 5-year and long-range transit plan. We produce our own regional transportation plan, and I'm going to talk to you quite a bit about that since we're getting ready to update it. But then we all try to implement the regional plan, 2030 Place Matters, which is adopted and is due for an update in 2024, I believe. So the process that we follow when we put together a regional transportation plan, so we start with identifying the transportation needs, and there's certainly an opportunity to coordinate with the Doney Park planning process to identify your needs and make sure that we're addressing those in this regional document as well. We talk about what's important to us and how we would measure whether we're meeting these needs. So we develop our criteria. And then we start looking at the universe of projects. And we have a history of digging up old projects and running them back through the mill to see if they have any validity or viability in the present times. We also put a lot of those back to bed or back to rest, but it's there's almost no such thing as a new idea when it comes to transportation in the Flagstaff region. So from that build out, from that university projects, we put together what we call the build out system. In the regional plan 2030, which the MPO is part of, we developed collaboratively with the city and county a forecast or a build out population of 150,000 people for that 525 square mile area. There's actually capacity if you were to scrape everything off and build it out per zoning. There's capacity for actually quite a bit more. Some things come in at higher densities, quite a few things come in at lower densities. So we thought 150 was a workable number, but we'll be revisiting that number in the next RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, as well as and use our process to help set up the following regional plan effort. And I found the conversation on accessory dwelling units to be very interesting, and that's something I'll want to learn more about because, as we heard from one of the participants tonight, it's adding to traffic, which is obviously one of my concerns. So out of that build-out system, we come up with priority projects. There's for the last process, we had a steering committee. We go through a pretty rigorous individual project evaluation, and then we put that into a program. In a previous slide, you saw the Transportation Improvement Program. The county has presented to you on their Capital Improvement Program, which is what a lot of jurisdictions like the city and the county have. They're very similar to our TIP, is their CIP. And we have to be fiscally constrained. So we do our best to project revenues and then program projects that we think within those revenues provide the best bang for the buck, if you will. This is just a slide showing kind of the contents of the current plan. And you can see it very much follows that inverted pyramid that I just walked through. But we also have discussions on operations and maintenance. And then because we are, I'm sorry I didn't mention this, but basically we're responsible primarily for the federal transportation dollars that come into the region. And as such, we use federal dollars to do our planning and are responsible by law, and I think just morally, to take a look at the social and environmental impacts of the transportation system. So that's also part of the plan. So to give you, excuse me, to give you an overview of what's in the plan right now, I'm going to start with roads and streets, and we'll talk about transit and bike and ped projects as well. So the build-out plan, I want to say, we expect build-out to be somewhere around 2090. So this is a long time, and not all of these are obviously funded. So we're looking at the interstates to go to 3 lanes, I-40 and I-17, pretty much throughout and across the region. Most of our major and minor arterials, these are our bigger roads, will stay at 4 lanes with the exception of Milton Road and East Route 66 in terms of our forecast. There's an ongoing study right now for Milton Road and US 180, and there are several alternatives looking at multiple lanes, 6 lanes. The US 180, John Wesley Powell, and Cedar will likely remain at 2 lanes. And again, we'll revisit some of those as we look at new forecasts and see if any of that has changed. Some conditional roadway projects. These are things that really need further study. Extending Schweitzer Canyon south to John Wesley Powell. It would be very nice to have a road that would help relieve traffic on 4th Street and Lone Tree as that whole area grows. But if you can imagine this, it's a relatively simple project that would have to go under 66, under the railroad, under Butler, under I-40, tiptoe through the wetlands and climb out to John Wesley Powell. And, through one of the favorite Foots Trails areas in the region. So, yeah, is that really feasible? Everything's feasible with enough time and money, right? And then at the time when we did this plan, it was adopted back in 2017. Lockett Road was being studied, was going to be studied to see if widening it to 3 lanes was worthwhile. That was conditional on the outcome of that study, which is no longer funded. you can see that very few of these projects, if any, directly impact Doney Park. There is one exception, and that's the last point here, and that's no bypasses. We did study, and you'll see a map here that you can see the location. We did study bypasses, both of 180 and 89. And 89 is the one that would impact Doney Park. And it was rejected largely on the grounds of its cultural impact, Picture Canyon, and the archaeological resources there. So how come oh, there we go. Up. A little delay there. I got to back up. Okay, so here's a map, and I'll explain the colors here, and I'll walk you through it. So the darker colors, and I should receive ADA benefits because I'm colorblind and have poor sense of direction. So for my profession, I'm really in a bad way. But the darker, I believe it's dark purple or blue colors and red colors and the wider roads are the worst congested. And this is built out somewhere around 2090. We kind of throw everything in the kitchen sink here, some of these new connections, some of these wider roads, a lot of transit bike and pedestrian stuff. And you can see, things are going to get pretty congested. Milton Road, and I'm sorry, is everybody, I should pause here, is everybody pretty well oriented to this map? And I don't know if you can see them. Can you see my
yes, we can see your cursor. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, now we
oh,
see
great.
your cursor, and that'd be helpful if you can point out while you're talking. That'd be
great. So here's Milton Road, and here's that area by the railroad tracks. So it's congested today, and it's still going to be congested even as we consider widening it. You can see here's Lone Tree Road, and at build out, we hope to have a new traffic interchange on Lone Tree. Here's John Wesley Powell, and even though there's quite a lot of development, it kind of is a watershed. Some goes to 4th Street, some goes to Lone Tree, and so John Wesley Powell itself doesn't carry a whole lot of traffic. The interstate, if it's widened, as I mentioned, will still be, if you think about a starting point here and you want to get over to the airport, the interstate's still going to be the better way to go than John Wesley Powell. So it's serving largely as a collector, if you will, for this south quadrant. 4th Street becomes congested. You can see 66 and Butler both get very busy. Again, part of the balancing of values, a lot of people really don't want to see 6-lane arterials cutting up the city. And so we really do need to look as hard as possible at either new routes, such as that Schweitzer connection, and that's it here, or transit bike and pedestrian improvements. The 89 bypass that I referenced would actually take off at Townsend Winona and head almost due south, to an interchange with I-40. That was the proposal. Its primary purpose would be to help traffic distribute out of the north, from and to the northeast to I-40 and bypass a lot of the congestion that's occurring here. It's fairly effective at that, but again, we're in the trade-off business when we do planning, and it was seen that a road, even if it was hugging Sheep Hill and off to the east as much as possible, was really too much of an impact to the Picture Canyon area, and so was left out. So I'm going to pause there, and maybe I should back up. Does anybody have any questions before I move on to transit and pedestrian and bicycle improvements in the plan?
Not at this point.
All right. Well, we'll go on and talk about transit. So right now, Mountain Line, the transit agency, is working on a bus rapid transit study that's also on Milton Road, the same road that ADOT is studying, in part to help address that bus rapid transit proposal. As you may know, the election in 2018, Proposition 419 passed for general roads, bike, and pedestrian improvements, as well as dark sky lighting. Another nod to Mark there. The Proposition 420 to build the Lone Tree overpass, railroad overpass, was passed. The one that didn't pass was Proposition 421, which was for transit. And at the time, we were doing the regional transportation plan. Transit had an excellent batting average in terms of going to the voters, and we were able to reasonably expect that it would pass. Unfortunately, it didn't. I think it failed by, I don't know, like 600 votes or something like that. But in the plan, we expected that BRT would happen. It would contribute to congestion relief within that central corridor. And then we do a little speculation in the plan on the future of bus rapid transit. And the reason why is if you look at these numbers here, in terms of saturation for cars, that bus rapid transit, you can keep adding more frequent and larger buses, where after, at some point, excuse me for my notifications popping up there, at some point, the cars just max out and you really can't squeeze another car through. The plan for pedestrians and bicycles are look at major gaps and key crossings in the existing system and set expectations for future growth areas. We really have some significant barriers in the region. The interstate, the railroad, Route 66 in Milton, and even when we get out here, 89, because it's such a high-speed facility, even though it's not extremely busy north of Townsend, Winona, and reduces as we go north to Silver Saddle, traffic's moving fast enough that it can be an issue. There is an active transportation master plan for the city that's underway right now. Hopefully will be complete by the end of this year. As far as transit and peds and bikes are concerned for Doney Park, you heard already from the county, and really want to commend them for the efforts they're making to put in wider shoulders that will support walking and biking. I can remember the angst I felt when I sent my child walking to Cromer School with a friend, and along Skeet, knowing that there really wasn't a great place to walk, and later heard stories about two young boys throwing rocks in the road, and so that was my excuse for never letting them walk again. I want to show you this as a possible tool for Doney Park. Metro Plan does work closely with our partners across the region. And one of the things that we've developed is a level of service tool. You can see all these different, get my cursor back on screen here, where to go? There it is. All these little areas here that are shaded, those are what we call traffic analysis zones. And for each of these zones, we've actually developed levels of service for pedestrians, bicycles, and transit. And we'll be happy to share that information with you. And what these are the composite pieces that make up, or the component pieces that make up this composite image. And so we look at, do you have, bike lanes or sidewalks, or in the case of the county-wide shoulders? How frequent are your intersections where crossings can be made? What's the quality of those crossings? And a number of other factors. And so as you, prepare your transportation plan component and look at the aspects that are important to you, we can help with that analysis if you would find that useful. So as we looked at the projects in the current plan, these are the weights that we came up with after some public participation. We did some online meetings, we did some in-person meetings, we had a steering committee, we talked to commissions. And so as we weighted these criteria, congestion came out fairly high, arterial density, and you know, as we look from an industry perspective, we should have about 8 lanes or 8 miles of arterial per square mile. I know that's getting a little esoteric here, but if you just imagine, you know, a mile grid of arterial streets, that would come to, you know, 8 lane miles around the outside of that square mile. And that's kind of typical for, you know, as we look at urban and suburban areas, what the industry would say you need. Well, if we throw our minor arterials into that mix, we get just above 5 lane miles per square mile. And so adding to that arterial network is seen as important. Multimodal improvements are very highly valued. Safety, obviously, and then economic development benefits you can see there. And again, depending on the type of process that you go through, you know, we can help develop tools, and certainly we'll be doing something like this again for the Regional Transportation Plan update that kicks off later this year, and we will be addressing the Doney Park area as well. So as I come to a close here, I want to talk briefly about funding. When we bring in federal funding, they need to comply with our Regional Transportation Plan and be approved by the Metro Plan organization and included in our Transportation Improvement Program. There's very little direct money that comes, relatively little direct money that comes to the area for planning, which is to our organization, about $700,000 a year. NAPTA, the transit agency, receives about $7 million a year. I believe that's right. I may have to don't quote that number. I have to double check that one. But they are a direct recipient of small urban area formula funds. And then competitively, and things are very competitive, there's several programs. There's the Federal Lands Access Program, and there's a state committee that oversees that. The county's been very successful in making improvements to Lake Mary Road and Mormon Lake Road. I think they're putting an application together for Perkinsville Road and south of Williams. You know, 89 would be potentially eligible, but I don't know that there's a lot of need on 89 for improving access. There's a build grant. I'm not going to run a mouthful of an acronym. That's very general, and the county has applied in the past for things like the Belmont traffic interchange. Infra grants, which can be high dollar grants. The state received a very large grant for improving I-17. It's typically a freight focus there. And then there's transit monies, CIG 5339. NAPTA has been extremely successful in getting those types of grants for things like improving their facilities, building the downtown connection center, which is under design. Then there's technology grants and railroad grants as well. This is probably the most depressing part of my presentation, in that I really kind of feel like the Flagstaff area is in not the sweet spot, but the sour spot. We're not a major metropolitan area with lots of congestion issues, and we're not extremely rural, which this current administration really favors. And so it's a challenge to compete for these grants. At the state level, everything is Yeah, pretty much everything is through the highway user revenue funds. I'm not going to hit on this too much since the county covered it, but it's your fuel tax. It's distributed by a formula, which is population lane miles and point of sale. And that tax has not been raised since 1991 and is suffering, if you will, due to inflation, since it hasn't been raised in so long. And as fuel-efficient cars get more efficient and become more prevalent, that also hurts sales. I'll throw in that it also hurts a sum on the point of sale perspective, in that people who come from Phoenix used to fill up before they went back, and now can probably make 1 or 2 trips up and back before they need to fill up, and can do that in the valley. Our biggest source of funds these days is local funding. And again, you heard about the, I can never remember who was, if it was the city was 403 and the county was 406 or vice versa, but the sales taxes that were passed in 2014, for road repair and safety in the city, and operations and maintenance in the county for streets. Property taxes are available, and I highlighted special districts in terms of, you know, is there anything that would be within the area plan, and I'll use the term control very loosely, but if there was promotion of special districts, for maintenance, for road construction, for other things, it's possible. I know one of the issues has been and continues to be pedestrian facilities and the desire for trails in the area. I know the county, I think, is considered a recreation district in the past, and has passed parks and open space funding, and so there's opportunities there as well. Private development is really more geared towards things that happen in the city. The county really doesn't have what's called a traffic impact analysis process per se, where they exact improvements from developers. But I think Mark used the phrase hearts and minds, and it might be possible to persuade some developers to put in facilities that you desire. So kind of in summary, the RTP is going to be updated. We're going to start that in late 2020. Welcome participation. Hope to come out and talk with you probably within the Doney Park process and have that roll up and into the RTP. We can provide some assistance. We have access right now to cell phone data through Streetlight Incorporated, which is very interesting in terms of looking to see where people come and go from different areas, and we can focus in on Doney Park and see what we learn there. We do a lot of historic traffic counts. Tim Dalagowski does a lot of counts in your area for the county, but we can look at those collectively. And then we also have a regional transportation model. The images from the current RTP that I showed, the results of that model. And it can reveal a lot in terms of what's out there. Actually, I'm going to back up just a second because I've heard it's a concern, and I did leave off one grant, and that's the Highway Safety Improvement Program. And the good news and bad news for that grant is the good news is it's 100% funding. The bad news is we're a relatively safe region. We do not have a lot of transportation fatalities and serious injuries. And so we have relatively few locations that would be competitive for those funds. And that's
those
actually
are federal, Dave? I'm sorry.
Yes, that's a federal grant,
okay.
And that's something to be thankful for. And that's, funding is a continuous need, and sometimes part of, I feel, my job is just making the case to all the funding agencies at all levels in terms of what that need is, and perhaps what the best investments are. And that might be the case for Doney Park in terms of any transportation discussion you have within your area plan. So as far as the current RTP, we really have no major projects forecast or planned for the Doney Park area. And that's really for any mode to speak of, whether it's road, transit, ped, and bike. A couple projects that are coming up, and then I'm almost done here. City is getting ready to launch design on the Lone Tree Railroad overpass. NATA is starting design on the downtown connection center, which is there on Phoenix. This was actually a slide having to do with the Rio flag and trying to coordinate all these projects, but they're some of the ones that really are next in line. And the Flow Nut, that's the shorthand for the Florence Walnut pedestrian underpass. They're just west of the Milton Railroad Bridge. So thank you again for having me this evening. It's been a pleasure speaking with you and getting to see some of you. Apologize for not flashing my face on the screen, but here's my contact information if you want to get a hold of me. Again, thank you for your time. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Dave, I think safety is probably a paramount concern of most of ours, and I know that the Country Club and 66 intersection and the Silver Saddle and 89 intersection are both fairly high accident rate areas that our area has to deal with on a regular basis. At least that's my perception. Is that the case? And is there something that area plans can do to address those kinds of circumstances?
As far as the actual numbers, I would have to take a look and get back to you through Melissa on that. We do have access to that data and should be able to explore that pretty readily. I believe 66 and Country Club is a site for frequent accidents. I think the Silver Saddle area is relatively infrequent, but when they do occur are fairly serious. So I'll get that information pulled together. It's something we'll pull together for the RTP, but I'll pull it together for the Doney Park area sooner rather than later, so you guys will have that. As far as can the area plan address that, I think identifying those areas of concern, even if they're relatively speaking not as serious perhaps as some areas, highlighting those is always a good way to inform future public investments. ADOT can time signals on occasion. There's been improvements at Townsend, Winona, and 89 in the past, and could be again. Certainly, as we weigh in on Country Club and 89 or 66 there, I think having that kind of public input, if you will, that this is a concern. I mean, it's kind of our I-17 in a way. You get stuck on a traffic, you have nowhere else to go. You get stuck behind an accident, and I think we've probably all been there, being Doney Park residents, and that's an evacuation concern. It's not just yes, it's a tragedy when there's a serious crash and somebody gets hurt or worse, but it's also I think an evacuation concern in terms of having people stuck in that area due to a crash. So I think registering those concerns are appropriate. And I do like the fact that you mentioned something, Country Club and 66, that's really well outside of Doney Park, but of concern to the region. It's kind of like, I mentioned I-17. As a region, we weigh in on 17 a lot, even though our region only goes down to Mountain Air because it's so critical to our commerce. So I like that perspective and encourage you to take that perspective across all the elements of your plan. Any other questions?
I have a second one, and that relates to non-vehicular traffic. There had been discussions in the past about pedestrian access via trails from perhaps the Silver Saddle area or even further north down into the Foots Trail connections. Is that anything that your organization is involved with?
Yes, and. So you heard a presentation earlier from Martin Ince, and Martin actually works for me, at least until July 1st. Through this independence process, Martin will become a full-time employee of the city, where he's part-time, he's partially funded by the city and the MPO. Martin mentioned to you the Flagstaff Trails Initiative project.
Yep.
He's much more familiar with that, but certainly plans like that. He's also responsible for the Active Transportation Master Plan, which would be the connections within the city that the Trails Initiative would tie into. We'll certainly be pulling those into the plan. We do need to consider all modes in our RTP, and then to the extent that there are federal funds available, those type of projects need to come through us. Now, I will mention this. There is a I didn't list it on the slide because it's not available today, and that's the Transportation Alternative Program, or TAP. And the state basically, pardon the bad pun, but taps those funds for other purposes instead of distributing them for trails and such. The Flagstaff region has been really successful in the past in getting funding for trails. The trail along Cokefield Road is funded through that program.
Sorry, and Dave, what was the name of the program again?
Transportation Alternatives Program.
Okay.
And so I think this came up at a meeting I attended earlier. The highway bill, or the bill that funds these programs, expires this September, and the Senate and the House have their draft bills in place, and both of them, I think, I'm sure the House does, I think the Senate does too, reinvigorates that program. The challenge right now is neither one of the committees that put those together has a responsibility of paying for it. And so they've added a lot of money, but with no payment plan. So there is an opportunity, as a county, as a committee, to weigh in. And again, it never hurts to be the mouse that roared and put that in your plan in terms of, this is what we would encourage the county to do, and that's advocate for more federal and state funding.
And that point ties back to the discussion and the presentation we had from Martin Ince and also from Tim Dalgowski about trails in Doney Park. And I know there is quite a bit of interest in trails from different perspectives. So, but funding to build them is definitely limited at this point. So that's why this conversation is important, to put that into perspective, because the FTI is pretty specific in some of the trail alignments, but it's, until there's some additional funding or volunteer groups, they're not going to get built. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, David.
Yes.
This is Brian Bates. Could you scroll back up to the map that you were showing the possible bypass? Yeah, this right here. Now, am I correct in hearing that you're saying that the bypass, and I assume that that's going to be Conditional Road? That's the only, unless you go to Winona, that's the only bridge to get across the interstate and the railroad track.
If I could explain, so there in the top right, near the top right corner, that is the intersection of 89 and Townsend Winona. So kind of the new north-south route would be 89 to this new bypass, and it would drop due south to a new interchange at I-40. So just about a mile. So it would actually be between Country Club and Walnut Canyon.
Oh.
And then, if you will, 89 from the mall would be kind of the new east-west intersecting road connecting to Townsend Winona.
But that project is not it's not funded and it's not under consideration at this point. Is that right, Dave?
That's right. You see the third bullet there? No bypasses.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
that's what I wanted to clear up. I wanted to find out whether or not that is actually a realistic event.
The date is 2090.
Oh, 2090. Never mind.
Well,
when I won't be here.
How far off is that? Is it, you know, it's being put off, but how far into the future and what road would that be?
So again, you know, the actual regional transportation plan document says there will be no bypasses. That line on the map is not actually in the plan. It's this is from an earlier presentation to highlight the process that we went through. Both of these areas, these big bubbles, are a little more expansive in the plan and actually call for capacity studies. So, and what that means for the 89 bypass is, hey, if we don't build a bypass, what can we do to make traffic flow better past the mall and really that whole Country Club I-40 complex there? Again, so we don't plan for a bypass, and we don't have funds for any other capacity improvement at this time.
And I think what's important to understand about this presentation is the regional perspective of transportation and the funding that might be available, or rather that's not available for projects Doney Park specific. So, you know, this is why I invited Dave to give this presentation so that we have this bigger picture. This image really well, I think, captures that. And then also to, you know, talk about the funding, because, you know, the regional funding is channeled through that organization. So, and it does relate to what Audra Merrick was mentioning when ADOT does their 5-year planning. It is a public process, and there's an opportunity for people to weigh in on projects. So that's another thing, I think, that with the, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but with the RTP update, there'll be opportunities for people to participate in looking at the projects and providing input on ranking them.
Absolutely, Melissa. And one of the things that we will likely do in this next iteration of the RTP is try to flesh out a little bit more clearly what could happen at 89 and 66 Country Club, what kind of improvements we need and put a cost to those. We might revisit the bypass at much considerable peril to myself. That's a pretty controversial topic, but I feel it's my job to revisit those things and say, all right, we still feeling this way? If so, great. If not, let's talk about what it would cost and what all the impacts would be, how we might mitigate those.
So there's definitely a lot of opportunity for further discussion on
Yeah, and I think we ought to keep in mind that they're still talking about all those trees they're going to cut down and take out Townsend Winona Road. And we need to remind people if they're going to do that, they're going to have to look at transportation.
So Dave, we heard a presentation from regarding the Fry project and some of the forest thinning efforts that are ongoing, and that there will be some, temporary traffic during those thinning projects. So I think that was one thing that that resonated with the committee, was understanding the impacts to the roads from the trucks, the logging trucks.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. Well, again, thank you for your time. If there's no other questions, I'm going to let you guys get on with your meeting. I think I'm going to sign off.
Thank you very much, David. We
Thanks,
very
Dave.
much appreciate your participation and all the information you've shared with us this evening.
Yeah, and I'll be following up with you, Dave, on a few things. So yeah, thank you very much.
All right, so let me, I think I need to stop sharing my screen.
Please,
so.
yeah. Just so I can get back on. Thanks.
There you go. You all have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. Well, that actually concludes our presentations for the night.
So we actually have some time that we can have some conversation and.
We do. Let me get down here to our agenda. So we can go into our work session and just talk about the presentations and capture our key points that we want to remember to carry forward for the planning process.
So I would suggest we start kind of in order of the presentations as we saw them. In the code compliance presentation, we heard a lot about the common challenges that are faced. Does anyone have any thoughts right now about what they'd like to see in the upcoming plan regarding code compliance and enforcement?
I'd like to see Coconino County do something along the lines that other cities in every other county does. And I can understand the constitutional requirement of being able to confront your accuser. And I think having, when other cities and counties do it, I would think that they become the accuser. That's the only way they can get away with it, I could think. But I think it's important because it, we're getting places that are getting more and more out of.
Okay.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that assessment. having worked with this sort of thing in other jurisdictions, I know how they do it. And yes, anonymous complaints are accepted, and I think that that's the best way to do it without pitting neighbor against neighbor. The only drawback that I've encountered with this is the fact that some people will center on very petty things as a part of the process, which creates problems for the staff enforcing it. But I have to agree with that.
I suspect we probably all agree, but I think we also have to recognize that's outside the scope of what the area plan can specifically address. It's something the county attorney and the P&Z staff have to resolve, and so we should focus our efforts in making sure to communicate to them those concerns.
Yeah. One thing we could do is improve our educational outreach about what the community expects. We might not rat everybody out, but we could highlight and raise the appreciation and understanding of what the community standards are and what people expect when they live out here. We could be more vocal, even though we're not necessarily confronting people.
Harry, are you suggesting something that, maybe we reference existing county code or
but we could make our
in our area plan, so that if someone's looking at it, they know where to go look to find out what it is that's expected?
Yes, I think I'm an educator, but that's exactly what I think. If it's really clear what
Right.
people can and can't do, and if we have it easily available, and if we give it to real estate agents and to firemen and police, well, you hear me, spread it out.
Well, and by referencing it instead of including it, if it gets updated, we don't have to worry about the plan not being current.
Yeah, let me jump in here. I'm not necessarily in favor of anonymous complaints, but I understand why there are benefits for it. But there needs to be education that goes along with it, as Harriet mentioned. And one of the things that I thought about was when an anonymous complaint comes in, is that something that just triggers going and talking to the person who's complained, or the person who is complained about, or is it going, or does it the anonymous person have to provide a certain amount of reasonable information about why they're making a complaint?
So just, Dave, this is Melissa, just to clarify, right now, currently the county does not take anonymous complaints.
I understand that.
Right, yeah, so, but when somebody does write in and fill out a form with a complaint, there's a fair amount of detail that they need to provide so that Elizabeth or whoever is the code compliance officer knows what to react to. So I would, think that in an anonymous system, the same thing would apply. There's got to be a substantial amount of information so that staff would know what it is we're dealing with.
Yeah, actually, I guess that's what I meant.
Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts about the code compliance issues? I know there was conversations about dust and our ATVs and access to forest and those kinds of things. Any other questions, issues with that we want to make sure to highlight so we can have further discussion?
Yeah, I think we should, I don't know if it's part of the area plan or not, but there should be some way to provide this educational information that there are, codes and there are requirements. And for example, I could walk around through Pioneer Valley here and find out that there was probably only one person who understands the actual dark sky lighting, and I'm talking right now. And because the others just don't understand it, don't even know about it.
Nobody knows anything out here.
And that, the community connections is one thing that I will really want your input on as a committee, and how we can do our best to reach as many people in Doney Park, Timberline, Fernwood as we can to when we get to the public open house part of our project. So this ties together with the educational component, but even bigger than that, just how to inform people, how to reach as many people as we can. So we're not going to solve that tonight, but that's definitely something that we're going to want to get as many ideas about, because through this process, we'll have an opportunity to do as much outreach as we can in all different formats. And hopefully that will be, one tool where we can provide some of this information education. So, and we create avenues that way. We create channels and we create connections. So, yeah, I've got kind of a list going, and, we'll be developing that list more as we get into greater details about outreach during the process, if that makes sense.
I think it does.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. Maybe we put on the survey as here's a question: are you code compliant?
That's not a bad question, as long as we provide the
context,
the resources to be able for them to research that.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving on to our next code compliance issue, dark skies and lighting. Following that presentation, I think one thing that may not have been real clear, and that I certainly learned in my recent experiences, is that while the county says we are in area 3 or for the lighting compliance, our current plan requires compliance with that higher standard 2 throughout our entire area. So obviously, in this case, we do have some flexibility, although it sounds as if we may be beat to the punch with the new plan coming, or with the new county codes coming out. But that's something we're going to need to keep in mind.
Just a couple of quick comments on that. The Doney Park area plan is given credence when commercial zoning comes along, and guys like you, Rob, have to meet the requirements. It is at this point very much up to the to staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission to get something worked out that is acceptable to everyone. And I know that it was a little difficult in your case, but we had some others. Same kind of thing, what's available. And it's quite possible, but the upcoming code revisions will take care of that, I think, very effectively. The other thing, the presentation we heard is an absolute quantum leap from what we had before we wound up with a code compliance person who was working for both the county and the city into the 21st century. We had no way, really, of doing this before other than looking at the cut sheets the contractor provided, and then would have the electrician install something else after the inspection of the cut sheets, that sort of thing. But the new code should address a lot of that. And we should move forward. And it's a very important part of Doney Park, I think, dark skies, as everyone has agreed with.
And if I could just, add to the comment about the permitting. So if you all recall, Doney Park has an adopted design review overlay. And what that means is even for commercial or industrial projects that do not need a conditional use permit, they still need to have the design review overlay, or DRO, approval through the Planning Commission. And it is during that review period that staff will look at the lighting compliance aspect. So that's another avenue where we're reviewing new lighting, lighting rather, for new projects. So we'll talk about that further, but there is that aspect, and that's where the area plan policy decision to adopt lighting zone 2 comes into play again.
And by the way, one thing is that the situation on lighting has improved dramatically, and there aren't any excuses for saying we can't get the lighting you need to comply with Zone 2 anymore. Just worked over this with Don Walters on a project he has within the city of Flagstaff.
I'd like to add
I will add this. Go ahead, Brian.
That there's a lot of value, economic value, in terms of dark skies. And I think that one of the things that we want to make clear as we work on policy is that, rentals, if you're renting property, or if you have, an Airbnb, and of course we haven't gotten to that, we'll work on this and so forth. But that's going to pull a lot of money, and it's actually, I think, a strong economic argument to move not only to level 2, but to make sure that level 2 is enforced. Now, I don't know what's involved in level 1. I haven't looked at those different levels. But the point I'm getting at is that I think that there's an economic incentive there for us to maintain the dark skies here in Doney Park.
And as everything usually has, there are both sides to that story. I can tell you that each of the street light fixtures, that I have 3 in my parking lot, were $8,000 a piece.
Oh, man.
That's the luminary alone, not the pole and not the mount or anything else. So while I respect and appreciate dark skies, everything has trade-offs, and
it does.
We need to ensure we consider all things as we move forward here.
I can chime in real quick. Narrow spectrum amber LEDs are becoming more prolific, and even in the year I've been doing this, much more intensely within the last 6 months. We've seen the availability of luminaires that are considerably more efficient in their respective amber luminaires come out at lower price points. So that is changing rapidly. I would argue that to an extent our enforcement work is driving the market, but lighting manufacturers are seeing the light here, no pun intended. And we are seeing some new developments. I've seen some, and I've seen new developments within the last couple months. I'm working on projects with the city to bring our own properties into compliance. It's a problem with our airport. It's a problem with City Hall. And we've seen some substantial developments in the last few months that are meeting our needs now at a much lower price point than before. Give it another year or two with increased demand, and I think we'll see some major developments.
Nothing like being the victim of technological progress, huh, Rob?
I'm glad I was able to fund all this research that must be improving the cost.
Yeah, the rest of us are too. Thank you.
Okay, any other thoughts or comments on the dark skies component of the presentations this evening? All right, we'll move on to the Metro Plan and the impacts that may or may not have on our area plan. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I got a couple of things that I think we can emphasize here and that belong in the area plan is an emphasis on traffic congestion. And Rob, I know I sent you many emails on this, the rezoning of the property that was proposed at Campbell and 89.
Right.
And during the discussion at the Planning and Zoning Commission, that became one of the points that we all dwelt upon. If you're going to increase congestion at that intersection, how would you propose dealing with it for an RV storage lot? And again, the same problems cropped up with the proposed dollar store down at Silver Saddle and also access to Johnson Ranch. And they were given a great deal of consideration. If you're going to add to traffic congestion, you may have a problem with rezoning or getting a conditional use permit on with a subdivision or commercial development. So it's important. We relied heavily upon what was in the Doney Park area plan and making a decision to recommend that the board turn down that zoning change. So it was unanimous. All commissioners voted to turn it down, and that was one of the very important aspects of it. So
okay.
It belongs in there.
Thank you, John. Any other thoughts with respect to, well, and maybe I'll add to that just a little bit, John. This area plan is going to be in effect for 10 to 20 years probably, regardless of efforts to improve or to update it more quickly. 20 years from now, I suspect that self-driving cars are going to be the standard, not the exception. And self-driving cars have the potential to significantly reduce congestion and certainly accidents. So it'll be interesting to see how the planning and the foresight that we're applying today may impact the future.
Well, should be, that is a worthwhile consideration. I'm sure that will improve things. I'd like to see a self-driving horse trailer that's about 30 feet long and how that's going to work. But technologically speaking, I think we're going to get there with that.
Yeah. They've got semi-trucks that do it now, so.
Yes, exactly. The Nikola outfit that is in that business down in South Phoenix, okay. Yes.
Yeah, actually, there's also another component to that is as the congestion increases, especially out here in Doney Park and so on, what about transportation, non-individual vehicle transportation, some kind of busing or rapid transit or something like that.
Right, and we heard from the NAPTA folks when they presented that I guess that had been considered in the past, and the current situation wasn't being further considered. They couldn't find, I think, viable models that suggested that would work. So.
I understand that. That's today's answer. We're talking about the next 10, 20 years.
And Melissa, do we have numbers that suggest what the increase in population density and traffic might be 10 to 20 years from now for Doney Park?
I know that the Dave, who we just heard from tonight, would have that in the RTP. That's part of the modeling that they look at with that projection. And I just want to clarify that his build out capacity for 150,000 people, that is within the regional planning area that he showed us. That's not the whole county. The whole county would be larger. Sure. So, and they're projecting that out to 2090. That's going to be updated with their new planning process. So yes, he would have those numbers available for us. And I think NAPTA also, they have an idea of what population density they need to run a bus service out. They touched on that a bit. I think that we were kind of left in that presentation with the concept of, promoting a van pool or rideshare as the most currently reasonable transit options for Doney Park, Timberline, Fernwood. In the future, if the population density were to tick up enough, then possibly the bus rapid transit would pencil out. And just that said, in terms of modeling, I did pick up just a couple of tools that MetroPlan offers as far as projections for population, but also he mentioned that they have access to cell phone data. That could give us some additional indicators about, how people are moving around in Doney Park, and that could go on. We will want to look into some of our demographics. Based on, and we've got that information from most recent census, 2010. By the way, I hope everyone has taken their 2020 census. Really important, because you've not done that, Rob? Okay, we'll have to have a talk about that, because it does translate, every person counted translates to those federal dollars that he's talking about for transportation. True. So just a plug in for that. But yeah, there were a couple other things that I picked up in his presentation that will help us with our analysis.
So Melissa, are you going to follow up with them and get us that data?
Yes, I have a note here to follow up with Dave on several things. So yeah.
Melissa, here's.
I'm glad you brought that up, Melissa, because I think that we need to be looking at the build out not only over the next 20 years, but we need to kind of be going, okay, where does that put us in 20 years? And what do we do now so that we can plan effectively for 20 years, but we're in good shape then for the next planning event?
Right, and I'm working on the build out based on our so we'll be getting into those numbers pretty quickly.
Melissa, here's one other thing to consider, Doney Park Water. They tend to look at this from the standpoint of what can their infrastructure support into the future, and they tend to regard what we have right now as very close to built out. Well, very close, relative term, of course.
Yep.
But that's the way they look at it, and I don't think that everyone here on the Doney Park area plan is interested in seeing Doney Park's larger lots all split into 1 acre lots. And that was the forecast of our previous director of community development here a number of years ago, that he foresaw that as happening. Now, I think that everyone would be very interested in wording that would discourage as much of that as possibly can be done within the limits of the zoning ordinance.
So this will be an interesting discussion, because there's a balance here, and we're talking about a couple different things. We're talking about wanting transit, but needing population density to support that and to bring dollars in to provide it. Then we're also talking about the other side, our values, and what does the community value by way of lifestyle, by way of density. These are the nuts and bolts of this planning document and what we're going to really need to focus on. So this is just something to start thinking about, because the other thing that we've heard, and we heard this from one of our early presenters when we had Chris Pastors talk about housing choices and whether or not Doney Park wants to provide additional housing choices over what's available now. So these are just some nuggets to start thinking about. But John, you're absolutely right. There are policies in the area plan, and that's going to be part of the hard work this committee will tackle. But I know we can do it in a really thoughtful and productive way.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about the same thing. Each one of the, until we get to some of the others, but right now, Doney Park, and you brought up the water supply. Water supply and utilities and so on are things that, of course, planning and zoning has to consider, but I think it has to be, if there are any special circumstances, such as Doney Park water, which is kind of special because it looks like it's at a limit. That should be something that is presented right up front, and not so that and what the kinds of things that would impact or be impacted by that.
Yeah, these are going to be very important discussions as we move forward in writing the policies.
Okay. Any other thoughts with respect to the metro planning presentation? All right. So do we have any public participants that have any comments that would like to be heard this evening? I'm really sorry that we're not getting a lot more public participation. I'd hoped to see ways to improve that, but so I would encourage all of the members of the committee to make sure to let the folks you communicate with regularly that live in this area know that they're certainly welcome, and we value their thoughts and opinions in this process also.
I'd like to,
go ahead.
I'd like to add one thing. One of my very valued neighbors is on the committee, and that's Evelyn. And I want to encourage her to, anytime she wants to come over and bend my ear a little bit about any of this stuff, may apply to feedback relative to planning and zoning issues, but you know, it's always worthwhile talking over some of this stuff. If you're just riding through on the way with your horse, one of your horses, stop by and chat for a little bit. You've been pretty quiet lately, Evelyn.
Thank you. I'll have to do that, John. I thought of a lot about that.
And John, horses like carrots, so make sure you have.
Hey,
okay.
Yeah, we get over and help feed the horses when Evelyn and Chris are away every now and then. Thanks.
All right, I think that then will complete our agenda for this evening. And we're making up for last meeting by getting done a little bit early this time. So we're staying on budget neutral here with respect to the time or demands on you all.
I have another couple slides here.
Oh.
Just to talk about the next meeting.
Okay.
Okay, and then so it's scheduled for July 9th.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see that? And then I will say we're 80% certain we have the new owners of Navajo Nation Gaming Enterprise of Horseman's Lodge lined up to speak to the committee. Also, we've got our county treasurer to talk about, again, some county finance realities in terms of where our funding comes from. And then a very important discussion about the Flagstaff Regional Plan, which will somewhat overlap with what Dave talked about, but more importantly, we'll start talking about the activity centers. There are 7 of them that are located in Doney Park. And we'll be looking at the build-out numbers. We'll start to look at the build-out numbers that we're putting together. Well, we'll probably, I know that we will take the build-out into August as well because it can get kind of detailed. So that would be for the next meeting in July.
Who will be giving that third topic?
I'm sorry?
Who will be presenting?
Oh, okay. So Sarah Dector is the comprehensive planning manager with the city, but she, part of her job is to manage the regional plan. And if you remember, the county has adopted the regional plan as well. Yep. So it's like an amendment to our comprehensive plan. So that's where their nexus is there.
Gotcha.
And
thank you.
Did you, Rob, did you want to just ask everybody about the meeting format going forward?
Oh, sure. Thank you for the little poke. So this meeting is via Zoom. I don't know what everyone's opinions of it are. I will share mine, and that is that while it's an alternative. It probably isn't as effective as us meeting in person. And we're curious to know, amongst the folks that are here this evening, what your thoughts would be about meeting in person at the next meeting in July.
Well, let me clarify that, because we would have to tie any kind of in-person meeting to where the county is in terms of being open again to the public. And I don't know if we will be open to the public by then. So the county has a very specific phase, a program based on 4 phases before we will reopen to the public. But we want to understand from the committee, you know, Zoom format versus in-person meeting format when we can go there again.
Or a hybrid version where
Or a hybrid, yep. Yep.
I personally, this is Evelyn, I personally won't go anywhere unless the numbers are obviously going down.
Okay.
That's kind of the position I am in, because my wife happens to be in the most at-risk category, and I haven't even been into town in 2 months, but you know, we'll just have to see what the situation is then, and a hybrid, if you can come up with something that may work, that's a hybrid, I might be amenable to that. So thanks for the suggestion.
Same here. My we're in the my wife and I are in the age group, and she has a condition that
okay,
serious. So
I like the Zoom also.
well, yeah, I like the Zoom is great because you know, considering the alternatives. But yeah, when we're ready, you know, and I think when the environment is that yes, it's okay to go out and have meetings, and we should do that.
Yeah, I'd just like to make one personal comment relative to that. I dislike any kind of telecommunications enabled meeting. My preference is for a personal face-to-face business, as it has been for many, many years. So I look at this as sort of an evil necessity, unfortunately.
Agreed.
I don't like it, but I'm going to have to do it for a while.
John, I agree with you. And I don't think that it's, I want to make sure that we're in compliance with not only the county, but also the Center for Disease Control guidelines before I will go to a meeting. But I think the idea of a potential hybrid is something that could be workable.
Okay.
Okay. Appreciate everyone's input on that. Melissa, any more pokes for me?
I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Do you have any more slides for us?
Let's see. We've done that. Committee final thoughts. We haven't done that, I think, in a little while. Did you want to do a little recap with the committee, with allow each person to give their thoughts?
But does anyone have anything they'd like to share to wrap things up here this evening? Okay.
I don't think so.
Then I think we are on bullet number 3.